The first sound Samuel Bridger heard that morning was the creak of his own bones as he rose from the narrow bed. 4:30 in the morning, same as always. The darkness outside the window held that particular quality of Arizona night, thick and velvet, still hours from surrendering to dawn. He sat on the edge of the mattress, bare feet on cold floorboards, and stared at the empty space beside him. 3 years now. 3 years since the fever took Margaret, and still he woke expecting to hear her breathing. The silence was its own kind of pain, sharp and familiar as the scar on his left shoulder where Confederate lead had found him at Chancellorsville. Samuel stood slowly pulling on his work trousers, the rough cotton stiff with dried sweat and mountain dust. His hands moved through the morning ritual without thought. Button the shirt, lace the boots, check the Winchester Model 1873 leaning in the corner, its walnut stock worn smooth by 20 years of use. 30 rounds in the belt, hunting knife on the hip, rope coiled and tied to his pack. He moved through the small house like a ghost past the table where Thomas slept in the other room. The boy was 12 now, nearly 13. Too young to have lost his father in the silver mine collapse 2 years back. Too young to carry the weight Samuel saw in those eyes, dark and old beyond their years. On the kitchen table Samuel left a note. The pencil scratched across paper, forming words he hoped he would never need anyone to read. "If I am not back by nightfall, find Sheriff Morrison." He did not know why he wrote it, just a feeling cold and persistent as the wind that came down from Mingus Mountain. The door closed behind him with a soft click. Outside, the world was still caught between night and morning, that in-between time when shadows held their deepest secrets. Samuel's breath misted in the cool air as he walked toward the trail. Head boots crunching on gravel, the sound loud in the stillness. Prescott was quiet at this hour. No miners stumbling home from the saloons on Whiskey Row, no freight wagons rattling down Montezuma Street, just Samuel and the darkness and the mountain waiting ahead. He had been climbing Mingus Mountain for 7 years now, ever since he bought the land and built his small ranch at its base. The trail was familiar as the lines on his own hands. Every boulder, every twisted juniper, every place where the path narrowed and fell away into nothing. But this morning felt different. The air held something he could not name. By 6:15 the sky had begun to pale, washing from black to deep blue to that peculiar shade of purple that belonged only to Arizona dawns. Samuel was a mile up the trail when he heard them. Voices, laughter, the clank of tools against rock. A group of miners appeared around the bend, 5 men with weathered faces and hands black with silver dust. They were talking about the new strike at Silver King Mine, voices eager and rough. "Heard they pulled out 40 pounds yesterday. 40 pounds at $1.29 an ounce. That's enough to drink for a month, that's what that is." They passed Samuel with barely a glance, eyes fixed on the promise of silver and whiskey and women. One of them nodded. The others walked on, caught in their own dreams of fortune. Samuel continued climbing. The trail grew steeper. His breath came harder now, lungs working against the thin mountain air. He was 44 years old, and some mornings he felt every single one of those years pressing down on him like stones. That was when he heard it. A sound. Faint. Almost lost in the whisper of wind through pine branches. A voice. Calling. Samuel stopped. Listened. Nothing but wind now. He shook his head. Started walking again. Probably just a bird. A coyote. The mountain playing tricks. But then it came again. Definitely a voice. Human. Desperate. He looked back down the trail. 2 more groups had passed him in the last 20 minutes. 9 men total. Had they not heard, or had they heard and chosen not to stop? Samuel's jaw tightened. He remembered another day 2 years back when the alarm bell rang at the silver mine. Remembered running, his heart a hammer in his chest, knowing his son was down there in the darkness. Remembered arriving 10 minutes too late. 10 minutes stolen by a broken wagon wheel that he had stopped to fix on the road. 10 minutes. The difference between life and death. He would not make that mistake again. Samuel left the main trail following the sound. His boots found purchase on loose scree small stones cascading down the slope with each step. The drop to his right was 40 feet, maybe 50. Enough to kill a man. Enough to kill anyone. And then he saw her. A woman clinging to the rock face, one hand gripping a thin root, the other pressed against stone. Her right foot dangled in empty air, her left ankle twisted at an angle that made Samuel's stomach turn. Blood streaked her left palm, dark and wet. She wore a dress of faded cotton, practical and worn. A leather satchel hung across her body, the strap cutting into her shoulder. Her hair was black as midnight, hanging loose around her face. And her eyes, when they found his, were the deepest brown Samuel had ever seen. Eyes that held both hope and the terrible knowledge that hope might not be enough. Samuel did not think, did not hesitate. He moved. The rope came off his pack in 3 seconds. He found a juniper tree, thick and old roots driven deep into the mountain, tied the rope around the trunk using the bowline knot the Army had taught him in 1861, tested it twice, then wrapped the other end around his own waist. "Hold on," he called to her. His voice came out rougher than he intended. "Do not let go." He did not wait for an answer. He went over the edge. The rock face was steep but not vertical. Samuel used his boots to find holds, his hands to steady himself, the rope burning against his palms as he descended. 20 feet, 30. The woman was close now, close enough to see the fear in her eyes, close enough to see her hand slipping. "I am here," Samuel said. "I have you." He reached out. His hand closed around her wrist, strong and sure. She gasped, a sound of pain and relief mixed together. Her fingers released the root, and for one terrible second they both swung out over nothing, held only by the rope and Samuel's grip on the juniper above. Then Samuel's boot found solid ground. He pulled and she came toward him, her body collapsing against his. She weighed almost nothing, this woman, but her silence felt heavy, as if she carried storms inside her that no one could see. At that moment the mountain decided to test them. A stone broke free from above. Not large, maybe the size of a man's fist, but falling fast. Samuel saw it, saw the trajectory, saw where it would hit. He threw himself forward, covering the woman's head with his own body. The rock screamed past so close that he felt the wind of its passage missing her skull by 6 inches. It struck the slope below and shattered pieces tumbling down into the canyon. The woman had not made a sound, had not even flinched. Samuel looked down at her and saw that her eyes were closed, not in fear, in acceptance, as if she had already decided that this was where her story ended. "Not today," Samuel said quietly. "Not today." He climbed, hand over hand, boots scraping rock muscles burning with the effort. The woman held on to him, her fingers digging into his shirt, her breath hot against his neck. 30 feet, 20, 10, and then they were up. They were on solid ground on the safe side of the drop, and Samuel was lowering her gently to the earth, his hands shaking now that the danger had passed. He knelt beside her, pulling strips of cloth from his pack, binding her bleeding palm, checking her ankle with careful fingers. Twisted, not broken. Painful, but she would walk again. She was watching him, those dark eyes following his every movement. "My name is Ayana," she said softly. Her voice carried an accent that Samuel recognized. Apache. The words came out shaped differently. Vowels held longer, consonants softer. "You saved my life." Samuel shook his head, not meeting her eyes, his hand still working on the bandage. Anyone would have done the same. That was when she spoke the words that would change everything. "No." Her voice was quiet, but it carried a weight that made Samuel stop, made him look at her. "Most people saw me fall. They turned away." Samuel felt something cold settle in his chest, something that tasted like rage and shame mixed together. "How long—" His voice came out barely above a whisper. "How long were you calling?" Ayana looked past him toward the trail where men had walked by, where voices had laughed about silver and whiskey, and dreams that did not include dying women on mountainsides. 45 minutes, she said. "I counted 18 people. I called to them in English. I called in Apache. I screamed until my voice was gone. Her hand touched her throat. They looked at me. Some of them looked right at me. And then they kept walking. Samuel sat back on his heels, the bandage forgotten in his hands. He thought about the miners he had passed, the ones laughing about silver strikes, the ones who had walked by with barely a nod. 18 people, 45 minutes. He remembered the alarm bell at the mine, remembered arriving 10 minutes too late to save his son, remembered the other miners who had been closer, who could have reached the collapse faster, who had chosen to wait for the rescue team instead of digging with their bare hands. Long enough, he said, to believe no one would come. Ayana's eyes filled with tears, but she did not let them fall. She just nodded once, a small movement that confirmed what they both knew. That somewhere in those 45 minutes she had stopped hoping, had started accepting, had learned that the world was full of people who would rather look away than reach out. Samuel finished tying the bandage. He stood offering his hand. She took it, rising slowly, testing her weight on the injured ankle. She winced, but did not cry out. "There is a place ahead," Samuel said. "Shade, water. You can rest there." "Where are you going?" Ayana asked. Samuel looked up the mountain toward the summit, still hidden in morning haze. "Wherever you were headed," he said simply. They walked together slowly, Samuel matching his pace to hers. The sun had fully risen now, painting the rocks in shades of red and gold. The desert stretched below them, vast and empty and beautiful in the way that only Arizona could be beautiful. Harsh and unforgiving, and somehow in the right light, touched with grace. After a time, Ayana spoke again. "Do you believe in fate, Samuel Bridger?" He had not told her his last name, but somehow she knew it or guessed it, and he did not correct her. "I believe in choices," he said. "I believe some people choose to stop, and some people choose to keep walking. And you?" Samuel thought about his son buried under tons of rock and earth, thought about his wife cold in her grave, thought about Thomas sleeping in the house below, carrying grief that no child should have to carry. "I stopped once," he said. "I will not stop again." They reached a place where two large boulders formed a natural shelter, casting deep shadows across a patch of level ground. Samuel helped Ayana sit, then pulled his canteen from his pack. She drank deeply, water spilling down her chin, and he looked away to give her that small privacy. "I need to tell you something," Ayana said after a moment. Her hands moved to the leather satchel fingers working the clasp. "About why I came here, about what I carry." Samuel waited. He had learned in his 44 years that sometimes the most important thing you could give another person was silence, space to speak, time to find the right words. Ayana opened the satchel. Inside, wrapped in soft deerskin, was a carving. She lifted it out carefully, cradling it in both palms as if it were made of glass instead of wood. A hummingbird. 3 inches tall, carved from dark mesquite wood, its wings spread wide in flight. The detail was extraordinary, each feather distinct. The tiny eyes formed from chips of turquoise catching the light. On the base, carved in flowing script, were letters in a language Samuel did not know. "My grandmother made this," Ayana said. "Grandmother Dakota. She was a healer, a medicine woman. She spent 3 months carving this when I was born. It is a talisman, protection." She held it out, and Samuel took it carefully. The wood was warm from her hands, smooth as river stone. The weight felt wrong somehow, too heavy for its size, as if it carried more than just wood and turquoise. "It is beautiful," Samuel said, and meant it. "She died last December." Ayana's voice had gone quiet again. "She was 87 years old. She lived a full life, a good life." A pause. "I was not there when she died." Samuel looked up from the carving, met her eyes. "I left the reservation 6 years ago," Ayana continued. "I married a white man, Robert Hayes, a good man, a kind man. But the tribe, they did not accept him, and so I left. I chose him over them." Her fingers twisted together in her lap. "We had 2 years together, 2 good years. Then Robert was killed 4 years ago, shot by land thieves trying to take a neighbor's water rights. And I could not go back. I was too ashamed. Of what? Of leaving, of choosing love over family, of not being there when my grandmother needed me most." Ayana's voice broke on the last words just slightly, just enough to show the depth of the pain she carried. Samuel said nothing. There were no words that could fix this kind of hurt. He knew that. He had carried his own version of it for 2 years. "She left me a letter," Ayana said. "Told me to bring the hummingbird back to the mountain, to the sacred place where she used to pray, to return it to the earth where her spirit walks." She looked at Samuel directly now. "I tried. I came alone because I did not want anyone to see me fail. And I almost died trying." Samuel held the carving, feeling its weight, understanding now what he carried. "You want me to take it," he said. It was not a question. "The person who saved me should be the one to honor her." Ayana's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "You should return it for me." "I cannot," Samuel said immediately. "This is yours. This is sacred. It is not a gift." Ayana's voice was firm now, stronger. "It is trust." The word hung in the air between them. Trust. Simple, powerful, terrifying. Samuel looked down at the hummingbird in his hands, looked at this woman he had known for less than an hour, thought about his son unreached, his wife unmourned properly, his life half-lived in shadows, thought about 18 people who had walked past a dying woman, and thought about the choice he had made to stop. "Tell me where," he said finally. Ayana's breath came out in a rush, relief and gratitude mixing together. She leaned forward, using a stick to draw in the red dirt. A map, simple but clear. 7/10 of a mile northeast. Look for 2 rocks shaped like doors. Beyond them you will find a circle. 12 white stones. In the center a place where fire once burned. That is where she prayed. That is where the hummingbird belongs. Samuel studied the map, committing it to memory. Then he wrapped the carving carefully in the deerskin, placed it in his pack. "When you put it down," Ayana said quietly, "my grandmother will speak to you." Samuel felt skepticism rise in his chest. He was not a superstitious man. He had seen too much death, too much suffering to believe in spirits and voices from beyond. But he did not say that. Instead, he just nodded. "Rest here," he said, standing. "I will be back within 2 hours." He left her there in the shade of the boulders, this woman named Ayana, who had learned the hard way that the world was full of people who chose to look away. He took the trail northeast, following her directions, the hummingbird a small weight against his back. The sun climbed higher. The desert heat began to build, shimmering up from the rocks in visible waves. Samuel's boots found the path, his eyes scanning the terrain ahead, looking for the door-shaped rocks. And as he walked, he thought about trust, about what it meant to give something precious to a stranger, about what it meant to accept that gift, that burden, that responsibility, about how sometimes the person who saves you is really saving themselves. The trail narrowed, climbed, twisted through stands of ponderosa pine that smelled of vanilla and butterscotch in the warming air. And ahead, rising against the blue sky, Samuel saw them, 2 massive boulders weathered by wind and time, standing like sentinels, like doors waiting to be opened. He had found the place. Samuel took a breath, adjusted the pack on his shoulders, and walked forward into whatever waited beyond. The space between the 2 stone doors was narrow, barely wide enough for a man to pass through sideways. Samuel turned his shoulders, feeling rough granite scrape against his pack, and emerged into a clearing that felt separate from the rest of the mountain, separate from the rest of the world. The silence here was different, deeper, as if sound itself had been asked to wait outside. Samuel stood still, letting his eyes adjust. The clearing was perhaps 30 feet across, roughly circular, ringed by ponderosa pine that stood like witnesses. The ground was hard-packed red earth swept clean by wind or by hands he could not see. And in the center, exactly as Ayana had described, lay a circle of stones. 12 of them. White quartz, each one the size of a man's head, placed with deliberate care to form a perfect ring. The diameter was maybe 8 feet. Inside the circle at its heart lay the remnants of old fire. Charcoal and ash, ancient and undisturbed. Samuel approached slowly, each step feeling like an intrusion. He had been in churches before in the great cathedrals of the East during his soldier days, and this felt the same. Sacred space, hallowed ground, the kind of place where men spoke in whispers without being told. He knelt at the edge of the circle, removing his hat, setting it on the ground beside him. From his pack, he drew out the deerskin bundle, unwrapping it with careful hands. The hummingbird emerged, its turquoise eyes catching the filtered sunlight that came down through the pines. Samuel held it for a moment, studying the craftsmanship. 87 years old when she died, Ayana had said, which meant grandmother Dakota would have been in her 50s when she carved this. Hands still steady, eyes still sharp. 3 months of work shaping this small miracle from mesquite wood. He leaned forward, reaching across the white stones, and placed the hummingbird in the exact center of the circle. On the ashes, on the place where prayers had once risen with smoke toward the sky. Nothing happened. Samuel did not know what he had expected. A sign, perhaps. A feeling. Something to mark the moment. But there was only silence and sunlight, and the faint whisper of wind through pine needles. He sat back on his heels, feeling foolish. Ayana's words echoed in his memory. "When you put it down, my grandmother will speak to you." Superstition. Hope dressed up as belief. He should have known better. Samuel started to rise, reaching for his hat. That was when he saw it. A corner of something barely visible tucked beneath one of the white stones on the eastern edge of the circle. Brown paper, aged and weather-stained. Samuel's hand moved before his mind could question. He lifted the stone, pulled out what lay beneath. An envelope. The paper was thick, expensive once, but now brittle with time and exposure. No name written on the outside. Just a single word in flowing script. Stranger. Samuel's fingers trembled slightly as he opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper folded once. The handwriting was beautiful, each letter formed with care, the ink faded to brown but still legible. He read, "To the stranger who brings my bird home. 20 winters ago I saved a soldier's life on this mountain. His name was James Bridger. He carried the same eyes as you, eyes that have seen loss. Trust is not given. It is built stone by stone like this circle. The one who saved my granddaughter will need to be saved himself. Look for the pendant. Dakota, December 1884. The paper slipped from Samuel's fingers. James Bridger. His father's name. Samuel's mind reeled backward through time. 1865. The war had just ended. His father had come home from Appomattox, gaunt and hollow-eyed but alive. Had stayed only 3 weeks before heading west, chasing some dream of silver and freedom. Had written letters for 5 years, sporadic and brief, always promising to send for the family. Then the letters stopped. Word came in 1870 that James Bridger had died of consumption in a mining camp outside Prescott. Died alone. No family present. Buried in a pauper's grave with a wooden marker that the desert wind had long since claimed. But before that, before the consumption, before the silence. Samuel remembered a story his father had told once late at night when the whiskey had loosened his tongue. A story about getting lost in the mountains, about an Apache woman who found him delirious with fever and brought him back from the edge of death. His father had called her his angel in the desert, had spoken of her with a reverence that young Samuel had not understood at the time. "She would not let me thank her," James Bridger had said, his voice thick with something that might have been tears. Said saving me was her honor, not mine. And now Now Samuel sat in a circle of stones holding a letter from that same woman written months before her death. Written for him, though she could not have known his name, could not have known he would be the one to come, except she had known. Somehow she had known. Samuel's hand moved to his throat, to the leather cord he wore always hidden beneath his shirt. His fingers closed around cool metal. He pulled it out into the light. A pendant, silver tarnished with age, shaped like a bird in flight, a hummingbird, tiny turquoise stones for eyes. His father had worn this every day of Samuel's childhood, had never taken it off, not even to bathe. When James Bridger died, this pendant was the only possession worth keeping. The only thing Samuel had of his father that meant anything. He had never asked where it came from, had never thought to question. Now he knew. Samuel looked at the wooden hummingbird sitting on the ashes, then at the silver one in his palm. They were identical. Same wingspan, same angle of the head, same tiny turquoise eyes catching light like captured sky. She had made two. One for her granddaughter carved in wood. One for the soldier she saved cast in silver. Two hummingbirds. Two pieces of the same prayer. Separated by 20 years and joined in this moment in this circle by hands that had no idea they were completing something begun before they were born. The wind picked up sudden and strong. It moved through the pines with a sound like breathing, like words almost spoken. Samuel felt it touch his face, warm despite coming from the mountain heights, felt it move around him, through him, as if searching for something. And then he was not alone in the circle, not physically. There was no one there, no ghost, no spirit made manifest. But Samuel felt it nonetheless. A presence, old and patient and somehow amused, a grandmother's knowing, the kind of wisdom that sees patterns where others see only chaos. He closed his eyes and images came. Not his memories, hers. A younger woman, barely 30, kneeling in this same circle. Fire burning bright in the center, her hands moving through smoke-shaping prayers that had no words. And before her, unconscious on the ground, a Union soldier. Young, frightened, dying of fever and infection and the slow poison of despair. The image shifted. The same woman, now middle-aged, carving wood with patient hands. Her granddaughter, maybe 5 years old, watching with solemn eyes. The girl asking why. Why a hummingbird? And the woman answering in Apache words that Samuel somehow understood, despite never having learned the language. Because the hummingbird knows the secret. It is small. It is fragile. But it never stops moving. It never gives up. It fights the wind and the world and its own tiny heart, and it survives. Another shift. The woman ancient now lying in a bed of blankets. Winter light coming through a window. Her hands gnarled with age, holding a pen, writing in English painfully slow, each letter a small victory over time and failing strength. Writing a letter to a stranger she would never meet. Writing because she knew, somehow she knew, that circles complete themselves, that debts get paid, that trust once given echoes forward through the years until it finds the ears that need to hear it. The images faded. Samuel opened his eyes. His cheeks were wet. He had not realized he was crying. The presence remained for a moment longer, not speaking, not judging, just there. A grandmother who had saved his father, and through him had saved Samuel, who had given her granddaughter a talisman that would bring a stranger to her rescue, who had built a circle of trust, stone by stone, knowing that someday someone would complete it. Then she was gone. The wind died. The clearing returned to its deep silence. But something had changed. Samuel felt it in his chest where the cold knot of grief had lived for 2 years. The knot was still there. The pain had not vanished. But it had shifted somehow, made room for something else, not hope exactly, but not despair either. Samuel wiped his face with the back of his hand, stood slowly, his knees protesting. He looked down at the 2 hummingbirds, wood and silver, separated by the boundary of the stone circle, but joined by something stronger than proximity. He understood now what Ayana had meant. It was not a gift. It was trust. Trust that he would come. Trust that he would understand. Trust that the pattern would complete itself in its own time, in its own way, without force or interference. Stone by stone. Choice by choice. Samuel left the wooden hummingbird where it lay on the ashes where prayers had once burned. But the silver one he returned to its place around his neck, tucking it back beneath his shirt where it had lived for decades, where his father had worn it, where it had waited patient and knowing for this moment. He replaced the letter beneath the eastern stone exactly as he had found it. Whoever came next, if anyone came, would find it there, would read it, would add another thread to the pattern, one choice at a time, one act of trust building on another. Samuel put on his hat, picked up his pack, and walked back through the stone doors into the wider world. The descent was faster than the climb. His legs knew the way, now his body moving with purpose. The sun had reached its zenith, blazing down with desert intensity. Sweat soaked through his shirt, stinging in the scrapes on his back from the earlier rescue. He found Ayana where he had left her, sitting in the shade of the boulders. She had fallen asleep, her head resting against stone, her injured ankle propped on her satchel. She looked peaceful, younger than her years, the lines of pain and grief smoothed away by whatever dreams moved behind her closed eyes. Samuel did not wake her immediately. He sat instead, his back against the opposite boulder, and watched her breathe. In and out. The simple miracle of air and life and continuation. After a time her eyes opened, found him, and in that first moment of waking before memory returned, he saw something in her face that made his chest tighten. Recognition, as if she had been expecting him, as if she had known he would return. "You went," she said, not a question. "I went. And—" Samuel reached beneath his shirt, drew out the silver pendant, held it so she could see. Ayana's eyes widened. Her hand moved to her mouth. "Your grandmother," Samuel said quietly, "saved my father 20 years ago, on this mountain. She gave him this." He told her everything. The letter, the images, the presence in the circle. His father's story half remembered and finally understood. The pattern that had taken 2 decades to complete. When he finished, Ayana was crying, not the restrained tears from before. These were deeper, the kind of weeping that comes when grief finally finds its way to the surface, when the dam breaks and everything held back comes rushing through. "She knew," Ayana whispered, "all this time. She knew I would need someone, knew I would be here, knew you would come." A pause, her voice breaking. "She forgave me, even though I was not there, even though I failed her." "You did not fail her," Samuel said. "You completed what she began." He moved to sit beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. Two people who had been strangers that morning, now bound by something neither could fully name. Not just the rescue, not just the hummingbird, but the understanding that some debts get paid forward instead of back, that some gifts are meant to travel through time, accumulating meaning as they go. "She said in her letter," Samuel continued, "that the one who saved you would need to be saved himself." He looked out across the desert at the vast emptiness that somehow felt less empty now. "I think she was right." Ayana turned to look at him. "Were you saved?" Samuel thought about the cold knot in his chest, about the way it had shifted, made room, about the feeling that had come over him in the circle, the sense of being seen and known, and somehow forgiven for the 10 minutes he could never get back. "I think so," he said. "Yes, I think I was." They sat in silence for a while, shoulder to shoulder, watching shadows lengthen across the mountain. The sun had begun its slow descent toward the western horizon, painting the rocks in shades of amber and gold. Then Ayana stiffened beside him. Samuel felt it before he heard it, the wrongness in the air, the sense of something approaching that should not be approaching. Gunfire, distant but distinct. 3 shots in rapid succession, coming from below, from the direction of the valley, from the direction of Samuel's ranch. He was on his feet instantly, pack on his shoulders, Winchester in his hands. Ayana struggled to stand, gasping as weight hit her injured ankle. "Thomas," Samuel said. Just the name, nothing else. But everything else was in his voice. Fear, rage, the terrible knowledge that he might be too late again. "Go," Ayana said. "I will follow as I can." Samuel hesitated for half a second, looked at this woman who had trusted him with her grandmother's memory, who had shown him that circles could complete themselves. "Come to the ranch when you are able," he said. "The White House with the split-rail fence, 2 miles south of town." Then he was running, down the mountain butte, skidding on loose stone lungs, burning the Winchester clutched tight. The shots had stopped, but that might mean nothing, might mean everything. Samuel's mind filled with images of Thomas, small and alone, facing whatever had come. The trail blurred beneath his feet. He took shortcuts that only 7 years of familiarity made possible, jumped a narrow ravine, slid down a steep section on his heels using a dead pine branch to slow his descent, ran harder when level ground returned. The sun was low now, shadows stretching long, maybe an hour of daylight left. Samuel burst from the tree line into the open scrubland that surrounded Prescott, his legs pumping, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Ahead he could see his property, the house, the barn, the split-rail fence he had built with his own hands 7 years ago when the world still made sense. And in the yard 4 horses, 3 men standing, one of them holding Thomas by the arm. Samuel did not slow down, did not stop. He ran straight through the open gate, the Winchester coming up to his shoulder, his finger finding the trigger. The men turned, saw him coming, saw the rifle, saw whatever was in his face that made them step back despite outnumbering him 3-1. "Let him go," Samuel said. His voice was quiet, deadly. "Let him go right now." One of the men, the leader by his bearing, smiled. It was not a pleasant smile. "Mr. Bridger," the man said, "we were just having a conversation with your boy about property rights, about how sometimes old claims get reevaluated." Samuel's finger tightened on the trigger, just slightly, just enough. "I will say it once more. Let him go." The man holding Thomas released him. The boy ran to Samuel, collapsing against him, his thin body shaking. Samuel kept the rifle trained on the 3 men, his arm around Thomas, feeling the rapid heartbeat against his side. "You have 7 days, the leader said. 7 days to vacate this land. We have a legitimate claim filed proper with the territorial office. This property belongs to Prescott Land and Cattle Company now." "The hell it does," Samuel said. "Check the records yourself. Your original claim has been misplaced. Without documentation, you got no rights here." The man's smile widened. "Of course, we might be willing to negotiate, for the right price." Samuel said nothing, just held the rifle steady, held Thomas tight, and waited. The 3 men mounted their horses. The leader touched his hat in mock salute. 7 days, Bridger. After that we will come back, and we will bring more than just conversation." They rode off, dust rising behind them. Samuel stood frozen until they disappeared over the rise. Then his legs gave out. He sat down hard, still clutching Thomas, still holding the Winchester, his whole body shaking with rage and fear and the terrible understanding of what he had almost lost. "Are you hurt?" he asked Thomas. His voice shook. "No, sir. They just talked, asked questions, made threats." Thomas pulled back, looked up at Samuel. "What did they mean?" "About the claim." Samuel did not answer immediately. He was thinking about the letter in the stone circle, about trust built stone by stone, about how some people chose to stop and some chose to keep walking, about how the fight was not over, not even close. Night came to the Arizona desert like a curtain dropping sudden and absolute. Samuel sat at his kitchen table, papers spread before him in the flickering light of 2 oil lamps. Thomas had finally fallen asleep an hour ago, exhausted by fear and the strange comfort of being held. Now the house was quiet except for the rustle of old documents and the occasional crack of settling timber. Samuel's hands moved through the papers with growing frustration. Land claim forms from 1878, tax receipts, bills of sale for lumber and seed and livestock. Everything a man needed to prove he had built a life on this land. Everything except the one thing that mattered most: the original claim certificate. The document filed with the Territorial Land Office that established his legal right to homestead this particular 160 acres. The paper that said this ground was his. It was gone. Samuel had kept it in a tin box under the floorboards wrapped in oilcloth against moisture and time. He had checked it every year on the anniversary of his claim, a ritual of reassurance. The last time he looked was 6 months ago. It had been there then, safe and intact. Now the tin box held only dust and mouse droppings. Someone had been in his house, had searched, had found what they were looking for, and taken it, which meant this was not some random reassessment of territorial claims. This was targeted, deliberate. Someone wanted his land badly enough to steal the proof that it was his. Samuel leaned back in his chair, pressing his palms against his eyes until colors bloomed in the darkness. His head ached. His body ached. He was 44 years old and felt 80. A sound outside brought him instantly alert. His hand found the Winchester leaning against the table. He moved to the window, pulling back the curtain just enough to see into the yard. A figure approached on foot, moving slowly, using a long stick for support. Even in the darkness, Samuel recognized the silhouette. Ayana. He opened the door before she could knock. She stood on his porch, swaying slightly, her face gray with exhaustion and pain. The walk down the mountain and then the 2 miles from town had taken everything she had. "I should not have come," she said. "But I heard the shots. I was worried." Samuel stepped aside, gesturing her in. She limped past him into the kitchen, lowering herself carefully into a chair. Her ankle had swollen badly, straining against the bandage he had tied that morning. That morning. It felt like years ago. "Thomas?" she asked. "Asleep. Unharmed." Samuel filled a tin cup with water from the pump, set it before her. "They came to deliver a message. 7 days to leave. They claim my original homestead certificate is gone, which makes my claim invalid." Ayana drank deeply, then set the cup down. Her eyes moved over the papers on the table, seeing without reading. "Is it true? Is it gone?" "Yes. And without it, I have no legal standing. The land reverts to territorial control, and whoever has a newer claim filed properly gets priority." Samuel sat across from her, suddenly too tired to stand. They have the law on their side now, or at least they have the appearance of law. Ayana was quiet for a moment. Then she reached across the table, her fingers finding the silver pendant that still hung around Samuel's neck. She held it gently, studying it in the lamplight. "My grandmother used to say that trust is like water. You cannot hold it in your hands. You can only create vessels for it to fill." She released the pendant, met his eyes. "I know someone who might help." Samuel waited. "There is a lawyer in Prescott, Mr. Harrigan. He has worked with the Apache, helped us when the territorial government tried to move the reservation boundaries. He knows how to fight men who use paper as a weapon." "I cannot pay much," Samuel said. "The land is all I have. If I lose it, I have nothing to pay him with." "Then we will offer him something else." Ayana's voice was firm despite her exhaustion. "We will offer him the truth, and the chance to stand against men who steal what they cannot earn." Samuel studied her face in the lamplight. This woman he had known for less than a day. This woman who had every reason to walk away to protect herself and her daughter from trouble not her own. Instead, she sat in his kitchen planning strategy, offering help. Trust given freely, he thought, creating its own vessels. "There is something else," Ayana said. "Someone else who might help. Do you know old Pete McAllister?" The name stirred something in Samuel's memory. An old man, weathered face, one eye milky with cataracts, a surveyor back in the territorial days before age and whiskey had claimed him. I know of him. He surveyed this land in 1878. I remember because my husband worked for him that summer carrying equipment marking corners. Pete McAllister would have records, maps, proof of the original boundaries. She paused. But there is a problem. What problem? The men who came today, Prescott Land and Cattle Company. They have been buying loyalty, paying people to forget things, to lose documents, to change testimony. Ayana's expression was grim. Pete McAllister is poor. He drinks. He would be an easy target for their money. Samuel felt the cold knot in his chest tighten again. So even if he has the records, he might not help. Or he might help them instead. They sat in silence, the weight of it settling over them like dust. Outside, coyotes began their evening chorus, high yips and howls that echoed across the desert. Lonesome sounds, the voices of things that survived by being clever and quick and willing to do what others would not. "I will talk to him," Samuel said finally. "Tomorrow, before they can." "Not alone," Ayana said. "I will come with you." Samuel started to protest, but she cut him off with a gesture. "My husband's name was Robert Hayes. He worked for Pete that summer. Pete knew him, respected him. If I am there, if I speak about Robert, it might help Pete remember that some things matter more than money." The logic was sound, and Samuel had learned in the circle on the mountain that some fights were not meant to be fought alone. "Your ankle," he said, "will survive one more day." She stood testing her weight, wincing but staying upright. "I should go. I am staying at the boarding house on Montezuma Street. Come for me at first light." Samuel walked her to the door. The night air was cool now, the desert giving back the heat it had hoarded all day. Stars blazed overhead, so many that they seemed to touch each other, forming rivers of light across the black. "Ayana," Samuel said as she stepped onto the porch. She turned, looked back. "Thank you. For coming. For helping. For—" He paused, searching for words. "For trusting me." She smiled, and for the first time that day, it reached her eyes. "Stone by stone," she said. "That is how circles get built." Then she was gone, limping down the road toward town, her silhouette gradually fading into darkness. Samuel stood on the porch long after she disappeared, thinking about circles and trust and the strange path that had brought them both to this moment. Eventually he went back inside, checked on Thomas, who slept with his arms wrapped around his pillow, dreaming whatever dreams 12-year-old boys dreamed. Samuel stood in the doorway watching the rise and fall of the boy's breathing, feeling the fierce protectiveness that had become the central fact of his existence. He would not fail Thomas, not the way he had failed his son, not the way he had been 10 minutes too late. This time he would be early. Morning came too soon and not soon enough. Samuel was already awake when the first gray light touched the eastern horizon, had been awake for hours, mind turning over strategies and possibilities. He made coffee strong enough to stand a spoon and fried salt pork and eggs, woke Thomas with a gentle hand. "I need you to stay with the Johnsons today," Samuel said as they ate. "Just for safety." Thomas looked up, fear flickering in his eyes. "Are they coming back?" "Not today, but I have business in town. I want to know you are somewhere safe." The boy nodded, understanding more than Samuel wanted him to. They finished breakfast in silence, then walked together to the neighboring ranch a half-mile south. The Johnsons were good people, settlers like Samuel, scratching a living from hard ground. They asked no questions when Samuel explained he needed someone to watch Thomas for the day. By the time Samuel reached Prescott, the sun had cleared the mountains, flooding the town with hard morning light. Montezuma Street was already busy with freight wagons and miners heading to the diggings and women with baskets making their morning rounds. Ayana waited on the porch of the boarding house, dressed in clean clothes, her hair braided and wound at the base of her skull. She had fashioned a crutch from a tree branch wrapped at the top with strips of cloth for padding. She moved slowly but with determination. They did not speak as they walked. The town watched them with curious eyes. A white man and an Apache woman moving together with purpose. Some faces were hostile, some merely interested. Samuel met none of their gazes, kept his focus forward. Whiskey Row was quiet at this hour, the saloons sleeping off the excesses of the night before. Pete McAllister lived in a room above the Lucky Strike, a narrow space that smelled of old sweat and older regrets. Samuel knocked 3 times before hearing movement inside. The door opened a crack. One bloodshot eye peered out. "Who is it?" The voice was rough, damaged by years of rot-gut whiskey. "Samuel Bridger. I need to talk to you about some survey work you did in 1878. The door started to close. Ayana's hand shot out, holding it open. "Pete," she said. "It is Ayana Hayes, Robert's wife. Do you remember?" The door stopped moving, opened wider. Pete McAllister stood revealed in stained long underwear, his white hair wild, his good eye focusing slowly on Ayana's face. "Ayana, little Ayana, who used to bring water to the survey crew." "Not so little anymore," she said gently. "May we come in?" Pete stepped back, gesturing vaguely at the chaos of his room. A cot with rumpled blankets, a table covered with empty bottles, papers scattered everywhere, yellowed and forgotten. They entered. Samuel closed the door behind them. Pete sat on the edge of the cot, suddenly looking smaller and older than his 80 years. "Robert," he said. Good man, good man. I heard he died, shot by land thieves, they said." 4 years ago, Ayana confirmed. "He was trying to protect a neighbor's water rights." Pete nodded slowly, his hands trembling in his lap. "What do you need from me?" Samuel knelt, so he was at eye level with the old man. "In 1878 you surveyed my land, 160 acres 2 miles south of town. I filed a homestead claim, but now my original certificate is gone and a company called Prescott Land and Cattle says I have no legal standing." Something flickered in Pete's face. Fear, guilt, both. "I remember your land," he said slowly. "Good survey, clean boundaries. I filed the maps proper with the territorial office. Do you still have your copies? Your records?" Pete's eyes slid away, focusing on the wall, on nothing. "I might. Things get lost, though. Time passes. Memory fails." "Pete." Ayana's voice was soft but insistent. "Robert trusted you. He said you were the most honest surveyor in the territory. He said you never cut corners, never falsified records, never took bribes." She paused. "Was he wrong?" The old man's face crumpled. He put his head in his hands, and for a moment Samuel thought he might cry. When he looked up again, his good eye was wet. "They came to me 3 days ago. The Prescott Land and Cattle men offered me $50 to lose my records, to say I could not remember the Bridger survey clearly, to testify that the boundaries were uncertain." His voice dropped to a whisper. "I took the money. God help me, I took it. I have not had $50 at one time in 5 years. Samuel felt something break inside him. Hope, maybe, or the last remnant of faith in human decency. He started to stand to leave, but Ayana's hand on his arm stopped him. "Have you destroyed the records?" she asked Pete. "No, not yet. They said they would send someone to collect them tomorrow." "Then you still have a choice." Ayana leaned forward on her crutch. "You can keep the money and betray Robert's memory, or you can return it and do what he would have wanted you to do." Pete was weeping now, tears running down his weathered cheeks into his beard. "They will hurt me. When they find out I did not keep my end, they will hurt me." "We will protect you," Samuel heard himself say. The words came out before he could think about whether they were true. "You help me save my land, and I will make sure you are safe." "How? You are one man. They are many. They have money and guns and the law on their side." "I have something they do not have." Samuel glanced at Ayana, then back to Pete. I have people who trust me, and I have learned that trust once given has a way of spreading, like water finding its vessels. Pete wiped his face with a shaking hand. For a long moment he did not speak. Samuel could see the war happening behind his eyes. Need against honor, fear against conscience. The old man he had become against the young man he once was. Finally Pete stood, walked to a corner of the room where a trunk sat covered with dust and forgotten things. He opened it, dug through layers of old clothes and rusted tools, and pulled out a leather portfolio. "Everything is in here," he said, handing it to Samuel. "Maps, survey notes, boundary markers, everything that proves your land is yours." He paused. "But you need more than this. You need a lawyer who knows how to fight them. And you need witnesses who can testify that you have been living on and improving that land continuously since 1878. "I know a lawyer," Ayana said. "Mr. Harrigan. He has offices on Cortez Street." "Good man," Pete agreed. "Honest, and he does not scare easy." He looked at Samuel. "But for witnesses you need people who have known you since the beginning, who can stand in a courtroom and swear you built that life with your own hands." Samuel thought about his 7 years on the land, the neighbors he had helped with barn raisings and harvest, the townspeople he had traded with, the quiet friendships built on shared hardship and mutual respect. "I will find them," he said. They left Pete with a promise to return before dark to help him move somewhere safe before the Prescott land and cattle men came looking for their investment. The old surveyor stood in his doorway watching them go, looking more frightened and more alive than he had in years. The law offices of Patrick Harrigan occupied a narrow building wedged between a general store and a barber shop. The sign outside was freshly painted, the letters precise and professional. Inside smelled of leather and paper and strong coffee. Harrigan himself was younger than Samuel expected, maybe 35, with red hair and sharp green eyes that took in everything. He listened without interrupting as Samuel and Ayana explained the situation as Samuel spread Pete's maps and records across the desk. When they finished, Harrigan was quiet for a moment, studying the documents with the focused intensity of a man who knew how to read between lines. "This is good," he said finally. "Very good. Pete's records are detailed and professional. They clearly establish the boundaries of your claim." He looked up. "But you are right to be worried. Prescott Land and Cattle has been doing this for 6 months now, targeting small landholders, making their original claims disappear. They have someone inside the territorial office, someone with access to the files." "Can we beat them?" Samuel asked. Harrigan smiled, but it was not a pleasant smile. It was the smile of a man who enjoyed a good fight. "We can try. The territorial judge, William Barnes, is an honest man. He will listen to evidence. But we need more than just maps. We need testimony from people who can verify your continuous occupation and improvement of the land. We need tax records showing you have paid every year. We need receipts for materials, witnesses who saw you build your house and barn. We need to bury them in proof." "I have tax records," Samuel said. "I have receipts, and I can get witnesses." "How quickly?" 2 days, maybe 3. Harrigan nodded. "I will file for an emergency hearing. Given that they have given you 7 days to vacate, we should be able to get before the judge in 4 or 5 days." He paused. "But you need to understand, these are not good people. They will fight dirty. They might try to intimidate witnesses. They might try to hurt you or your family." Samuel thought about Thomas sleeping peacefully last night after being grabbed by strangers. Thought about standing on his porch with a Winchester finger on the trigger, that moment of nearly pulling it. "Let them try," he said quietly. They left Harrigan's office with a plan. Samuel would gather witnesses and documents. Ayana would help coordinate, would use her connections in the Apache community to spread word of what was happening. Harrigan would prepare the legal argument, would build the case with careful precision. Trust that spreads when given freely. By the time they emerged onto Cortez Street, the sun had climbed to noon, baking the town in white heat. Samuel's head swam with exhaustion and information. He had been awake for nearly 30 hours, had climbed a mountain, saved a life, discovered a connection to his father, faced down armed men, and now committed to a legal battle that might cost him everything. But he did not feel defeated. He felt for the first time in 2 years like he was moving forward instead of standing still. "I need to get Thomas," he said to Ayana, "and then I need to start visiting neighbors, building the case." "I will come with you," she said. "Your ankle needs rest." "My ankle can wait." Her voice was firm. "You helped me when no one else would. Now I help you. That is how circles work." Samuel looked at her. This woman who had fallen into his life literally and figuratively, who had brought him a hummingbird and a letter and a reason to believe that debts paid forward mattered more than debts paid back. "One step at a time," he said. "One step at a time." She agreed. They walked together through Prescott past the curious stares and whispered conversations, two people who should have been strangers but who had become something else. Something the world did not have a name for yet, but which felt in that moment like the beginning of something that might save them both. The Johnson Ranch sat in a shallow valley where spring water gathered in a natural basin, making the land green when everything else was brown. Samuel and Ayana arrived to find Thomas helping with the afternoon, milking his small hands steady on the cow's teats, filling a bucket with warm, frothy milk. The boy looked up at the sound of boots on hard-packed earth. Relief flooded his face when he saw Samuel, though he tried to hide it, tried to be brave. 12 years old and already learning to swallow fear to present a calm exterior to a world that did not care about the storms inside. "Can we go home now?" Thomas asked, setting down the bucket carefully so as not to spill. Samuel hesitated. Home meant the ranch, meant isolation, meant being vulnerable if the Prescott land and cattlemen decided 7 days was too long to wait. But home also meant Thomas's bed, his things, the illusion of normalcy in a world that had suddenly tilted sideways. "Not yet," Samuel said. "We have work to do first, people to see." He explained to the Johnsons what was happening, asked if Thomas could stay one more night. They agreed without hesitation, these hard people who understood that in frontier country you helped your neighbors because someday you would need help yourself. The currency was not money, but reciprocity, trust exchanged for trust, stone by stone. Samuel and Ayana spent the afternoon riding a borrowed wagon through the territory, stopping at every ranch and farm within 10 miles. At each stop, Samuel explained the situation, showed Pete's maps, asked if anyone remembered him filing his claim in 1878, remembered him building his house and barn, remembered the years of honest work that had transformed raw land into productive ground. Most remembered. Some had receipts for tools borrowed or labor exchanged. Others had nothing but memory and a willingness to swear to truth. A surprising number agreed to testify to stand before a judge and risk making enemies of the Prescott Land and Cattle Company. "Why?" Samuel asked one old rancher, a man named Calhoun, who ran sheep in the high country. "Why risk it?" Calhoun spat tobacco juice into the dirt, studied Samuel with eyes that had seen everything the West could show a man. "Because if they can take your land with paper and lies, they can take mine too. And because I am too old and too mean to let rich men steal from poor ones without a fight." He paused. "Also, your boy Thomas helped me find my lost ram last spring. Spent 3 days in the hills looking. Would not take a penny for it. A man who raises a boy like that deserves better than to be robbed." By the time the sun touched the western mountains, Samuel had a list of 14 witnesses, men and women who would stand with him, who would risk retaliation to tell the truth. Trust like water. They returned to Prescott as darkness fell. The town was alive with evening activity. Miners fresh from the digging spending their silver on whiskey and cards and the promise of forgetting. Families hurrying home to supper. Shopkeepers closing shutters against the night. Samuel took Ayana back to the boarding house, then went to collect Pete McAllister. The old surveyor had spent the day packing his few possessions into a canvas bag, preparing to abandon the only home he had known for a decade. He looked smaller somehow, diminished by fear and the weight of choosing right over easy. "Where will I go?" Pete asked as they walked through the streets, staying to shadows, avoiding attention. "My ranch," Samuel said. "You will stay in the barn loft until this is settled. It is not much, but it is safe. They will know I helped you when they come for the records tomorrow and find me gone. Let them know." Samuel's voice was harder than he intended. "Let them understand that their money does not buy everything." They reached the edge of town where Samuel had left his horse tied. He was helping Pete mount behind him when a voice called from the darkness. "Well now, look at this!" 3 men stepped from between buildings. Samuel recognized them instantly. The same 3 who had come to his ranch the day before. The leader, whose name Samuel still did not know, smiled that unpleasant smile. "You were told to vacate Bridger, not to go stirring up trouble." Samuel's hand moved toward his belt where his knife waited, but the men were already armed hands resting on holstered pistols. 3 against 1, and Pete was too old to be any help in a fight. "I am not going anywhere," Samuel said, "and you have no legal right to force me." "Legal right," the leader laughed. "We are talking about the law now. That is rich. You with your stolen land and your forged papers." "I never stole anything. I filed properly in 1878. You are the thieves here." The smile faded. The leader stepped closer and Samuel could smell whiskey on his breath, sweet and sour. "You do not understand how this works. We are not some two-bit operation. Prescott Land and Cattle has money, connections, friends in the territorial government. You think some old drunk surveyor's maps are going to change anything?" He glanced at Pete, contempt in his eyes. "Pete here already took our money, already agreed to forget what he knows. Isn't that right, Pete?" The old man said nothing, just clutched his canvas bag tighter. "See?" The leader spread his hands. "No one is going to help you. No one is going to testify. Because everyone understands that standing against us means losing, means accidents, means fires that start mysteriously in the night, means children who get lost and do not come home." That was the moment Samuel's control broke. He did not remember deciding to move, did not remember his fist swinging. But suddenly, he was on the man, driving him backward into the wall, his forearm across the throat, pressing hard enough to cut off air. "You threaten my family again," Samuel said, his voice barely above a whisper, "and I will kill you, not because I want to, but because I will have no choice." Hands grabbed him from behind. The other 2 men pulled him off their leader, threw him to the ground. Boots came next, hard impacts to his ribs and back. Samuel tried to cover his head, tried to protect vital organs, but the blows kept coming. Then a gunshot split the night. Everyone froze. Samuel looked up through swelling eyes to see Ayana standing 10 feet away, smoke curling from the barrel of a small pistol pointed at the sky. Her face was fierce, transformed by rage into something ancient and dangerous. "Leave him alone," she said, each word clipped and precise, "or the next shot will not be a warning." The leader straightened his clothes, rubbing his throat where Samuel's forearm had pressed. He looked at Ayana with calculation, weighing options. "You are making a mistake," he said finally. "All of you, but especially you Apache. Your people have learned what happens when you stand against white men's law. Do you really want to learn that lesson again?" Ayana did not lower the pistol. "I learned something different. I learned that some white men are cowards who hide behind paper and hired guns, and I learned that not all white men are like that." She gestured toward Samuel with her free hand. "This one stops for dying women. This one keeps his word. This one builds instead of stealing. So yes, I stand with him, and if you want to hurt him, you will have to go through me first." The silence that followed was thick and dangerous. Then the leader smiled again, that cold, calculated smile. "5 days now," he said to Samuel. "You just lost 2 days for that little display. 5 days, Bridger. Then we come for what is ours." They walked away, boots echoing on wooden sidewalks, disappearing into the nightlife of Prescott. Samuel struggled to his feet, ribs screaming protest. Pete helped support him on one side. Ayana on the other, the pistol still clutched in her hand. "Where did you get that?" Samuel asked when he could breathe enough to speak. "My husband's. I kept it after he died. For protection." She looked at him, concern replacing anger in her eyes. "Can you ride?" "I will manage." They made it back to Samuel's ranch just after midnight. Every movement sent fresh pain through Samuel's torso. Probably cracked ribs, maybe broken. But nothing that would kill him. Nothing that would stop him from fighting. He got Pete settled in the barn loft with blankets and food, then limped to the house. Ayana insisted on coming inside, on checking his injuries properly. Samuel did not have the strength to argue. She heated water on the stove, tore clean cloth into strips, cleaned the cuts and abrasions with capable hands that had clearly done this work before. When she pressed against his ribs searching for breaks, Samuel could not suppress a groan. "Two cracked," she said. "Maybe three. You need to bind them tight. Limit movement for at least a week." "I do not have a week." "I know." She met his eyes, and in the lamplight he saw something there he could not name. Respect, maybe, or recognition. The acknowledgement that some men cannot be stopped even when they should be. "So we will work around it. I will do what you cannot. I will carry messages. I will coordinate witnesses. You will rest when possible and push when necessary. This is not your fight." "Yes, it is." Her hands continued wrapping his ribs, pulling the cloth tight enough to support, but not so tight he could not breathe. "It became my fight the moment those men threatened you. The moment they showed me that the same evil that killed my husband is still here, still taking what it wants, still hurting good people." When she finished, Samuel sat very still, feeling the support of the binding feeling, the ache of damaged tissue beneath. Ayana cleaned up the medical supplies, then moved to the door. "I should go," she said. "It is late." "Stay." The word came out before Samuel could consider it. "I mean, it is dangerous walking back to town. You can sleep in the spare room, Thomas's room. He is not here anyway." Ayana studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "Just for tonight." But they both knew it was not just about tonight. Something had shifted in the hours since dawn. Some boundary had been crossed that neither of them had intended to cross. Two people thrown together by circumstance, discovering that circumstance sometimes knows more than planning ever could. Samuel showed her to Thomas's room, brought her clean water and a blanket. Then he returned to his own bed, lay down carefully, and stared at the ceiling while his body catalogued its damages. Tomorrow would be day 3. 5 days left according to the Prescott land and cattle men, though Samuel suspected they would not wait that long. Not after tonight's confrontation. They would come sooner, would try to force the issue before he could build his case, which meant he had to move faster. Sleep came eventually, fitful and shallow, interrupted by pain and worry. When dawn light touched the window, Samuel was already awake, already planning the day ahead. He found Ayana in the kitchen making coffee over the stove. She had found flour and salt pork, was preparing breakfast with the efficiency of someone who had done this work 1,000 times. "How are the ribs?" she asked without turning. "Manageable." Liar. But there was warmth in her voice. "Sit, eat. Then we need to visit Mr. Harrigan. The hearing is scheduled for tomorrow afternoon." Samuel's head snapped up. "Tomorrow, that is too soon. I thought we had 4 or 5 days." Harrigan sent a message early this morning. Judge Barnes moved up the schedule. Apparently, the territorial governor is putting pressure to resolve land disputes quickly. Too many claims in limbo, too much uncertainty, hurting development. She set a plate before him, eggs and pork and fried bread. "So we go to court tomorrow at 2 in the afternoon, which means today we finalize everything." They ate quickly, then rode together back to town. The morning was already hot, promising a scorching afternoon. Prescott stirred to life around them, unaware that in this courtroom tomorrow something important would be decided, that the balance between justice and power would be tested. Harrigan's office was organized chaos. Papers covered every surface. 3 law books lay open, marked with slips of paper. The lawyer himself looked like he had not slept, his red hair wild, his eyes bloodshot but sharp. "Good, you are here." He gestured them to chairs. "I have the witness list. 14 people willing to testify. That is good, very good. But we have a problem." "What problem?" Samuel asked. Prescott Land and Cattle filed their own witnesses, including 2 clerks from the Territorial Land Office who will testify that your original claim was improperly filed, that the boundaries were never clearly marked, that subsequent surveys found errors that invalidate your homestead. Harrigan paused. "They are lying, of course. Pete's records prove that, but they have official positions. Their testimony will carry weight with the judge." "So what do we do?" "We attack their credibility. Show the judge that these men have financial interest in lying, that they have been involved in other suspicious land transfers." Harrigan pulled out a ledger, opened it to a marked page. "I did some research last night. In the past 6 months, the Territorial Land Office has processed 17 claim disputes. 15 of them resulted in small landholders losing their property to larger companies. Always the same pattern: missing paperwork, convenient errors, new claims filed immediately after the old ones are invalidated." Samuel leaned forward, ignoring the pain in his ribs. "You are saying this is systematic, that the land office itself is corrupt?" "I am saying someone in the land office is corrupt, and I am saying we need to prove it to Judge Barnes." Harrigan closed the ledger. "Which brings me to the other problem. We need someone to testify about the pattern, someone who has been investigating, someone with credibility." "Who?" "Sheriff Morrison. He has been looking into the land company for months, has records of complaints, has evidence of intimidation and threats." Harrigan looked uncomfortable. "But he is reluctant to testify. Says it could jeopardize an ongoing investigation. Says he is not ready to move yet." Ayana spoke for the first time. "Then we convince him he is ready." The 3 of them went together to the sheriff's office, a low adobe building on the square. Morrison was there, a big man with silver hair and a face weathered by 30 years of keeping order in rough country. He listened to their request without expression. "I know what Prescott Land and Cattle is doing," he said when they finished. "I have been watching them, gathering evidence. But if I testify tomorrow, if I show my hand too early, they will destroy everything I have been building. We'll cover their tracks. We'll make sure I can never touch them." "How many more people have to lose their land before you act?" Samuel's voice was rough with frustration. "How many more families have to be threatened?" "As many as it takes to build a case that will stick." Morrison's face softened slightly. "I am sorry, Bridger, truly. But I am playing a longer game here. If I sacrifice you to save 10 others, that is what I will do." They left the sheriff's office in defeated silence. Without Morrison's testimony, their case was weaker. Still winnable maybe, but no longer certain. Samuel stood on the sidewalk, feeling the weight of it all pressing down. The pain in his ribs, the exhaustion in his bones, the knowledge that tomorrow might end with him and Thomas homeless, wandering, starting over with nothing. Then he felt Ayana's hand slip into his, small and strong and warm. "We will win," she said quietly. "Stone by stone. We will build something they cannot tear down." Samuel wanted to believe her, wanted to trust that justice would prevail, that right would triumph over wrong. But he had lived too long, seen too much to believe in fairy tales. Still he squeezed her hand back, held it for just a moment before propriety demanded he release it. "Tomorrow, then," he said. "Tomorrow." They spent the rest of the day preparing, visiting each witness to confirm they would come to court, organizing documents in the order Harrigan specified, making sure every receipt, every tax record, every scrap of proof was ready to present. By evening, Samuel's body was screaming for rest, but his mind was too active, too full of scenarios and possibilities. He lay in his bed that night listening to Ayana moving quietly in Thomas's room, listening to Pete snoring in the barn loft, listening to the desert wind that never stopped, that had been blowing across this land long before humans came with their claims and their conflicts and their endless need to own what could never truly be owned. Tomorrow would come, regardless of whether he was ready. Tomorrow would decide everything. And Samuel Bridger, 44 years old, twice bereaved, once failed, would stand before a judge and fight for the only thing he had left that mattered: home. The Prescott Territorial Courthouse stood at the north end of the plaza, a two-story structure of local granite that gleamed white in the afternoon sun. Samuel arrived at 1:30, giving himself time to settle his nerves, to breathe through the pain in his ribs that flared with every step. Ayana walked beside him, dressed in her finest clothes, a dark blue dress with intricate beadwork at the collar that marked her Apache heritage. She had insisted on being there on sitting where Samuel could see her, on being a visible reminder that he did not stand alone. Thomas was with them too. Samuel had collected him that morning from the Johnsons, had explained what was happening, had given the boy the choice to stay away or to witness. Thomas had chosen to witness, to see firsthand whether the law protected good men or destroyed them. The courtroom was already filling when they entered. Samuel recognized many faces. His witnesses scattered through the benches, nodding and greeting, curious townspeople drawn by gossip and the promise of drama. And in the front row on the left side, 3 men in expensive suits who could only be representatives of the Prescott Land and Cattle Company. The leader from the confrontation 2 nights ago sat among them, his neck still showing faint bruises where Samuel's forearm had pressed. He smiled when he saw Samuel enter, a smile that promised retribution regardless of how the judge ruled. Patrick Harrigan was already at the defense table, papers organized in neat stacks, his red hair combed back severely, his expression focused and calm. He gestured Samuel to sit beside him. "How are you feeling?" Harrigan asked quietly. "Like I got kicked by 3 horses. Try not to grimace when you breathe. The judge will notice. We want you looking strong, not injured." Harrigan glanced at the opposition table. "Their lead lawyer is Gordon Blackwell. He has a reputation for aggressive tactics. Do not let him provoke you. No matter what he says, stay calm." Samuel nodded, though staying calm felt about as likely as stopping his heart from beating. At precisely 2 o'clock, a door at the front of the courtroom opened. Everyone rose as Judge William H. Barnes entered. He was a man in his 60s, tall and lean, with white hair and eyes that missed nothing. He wore the traditional black robes of his office, but there was nothing ceremonial in his bearing. This was a man who had seen the worst humanity could offer and had chosen to believe in law anyway. "Be seated," Barnes said, his voice carrying easily through the room. He settled into his chair, surveyed the courtroom with those sharp eyes, then looked at the papers before him. "We are here today to resolve a dispute regarding land claim number 847, filed in 1878 by one Samuel Bridger for property 2 miles south of this town. Mr. Harrigan, you are representing the claimant. I am your honor. And Mr. Blackwell, you represent Prescott Land and Cattle Company, who assert a superior claim to the same property." Gordon Blackwell stood smoothly, a man comfortable in courtrooms, comfortable with power. "That is correct, Your Honor. We will demonstrate that Mr. Bridger's original claim was improperly filed and therefore invalid, which makes the land available for legitimate homesteading. My client has filed properly and should be awarded clear title." Barnes nodded slowly. "Very well. Mr. Blackwell, as you are challenging an existing claim, you will present first. Call your first witness." Blackwell called one of the Territorial Land Office clerks, a nervous man named Jenkins, who kept adjusting his collar as he took the stand. After being sworn in, Blackwell led him through testimony about procedures, about filing requirements, about the importance of proper documentation. "And in your examination of the records," Blackwell asked, "did you find Mr. Bridger's original homestead certificate?" "No, sir, I did not." "Did you find any copy of it? Any duplicate filed with the Territorial Office?" "No, sir." "In your professional opinion, Mr. Jenkins, what does the absence of this documentation mean?" Jenkins swallowed hard. It means there is no proof that Mr. Bridger filed properly. Without the certificate, the claim cannot be verified. Thank you. No further questions. Harrigan rose for cross-examination. He moved slowly, deliberately, letting silence build before he spoke. Mr. Jenkins, how long have you worked at the Territorial Land Office? 8 months, sir. 8 months. And in that time, how many homestead certificates have gone missing from the files? I am not sure of the exact number. Would you say 5, 10, 20? Jenkins shifted uncomfortably. Perhaps 15 or so. 15 certificates missing in 8 months. That seems like quite a lot. Would you say that is normal? I could not speak to what is normal, sir. I have only worked there 8 months. Indeed. And were any of those 15 missing certificates involved in land disputes? Objection, Blackwell called. Relevance. Your Honor, Harrigan said calmly, I am establishing a pattern that directly relates to the validity of this claim. Barnes considered for a moment. I will allow it. Answer the question, Mr. Jenkins. I believe several were involved in disputes, yes. And in those disputes, did the original claimants or the new claimants prevail? Jenkins' face reddened. The new claimants, sir. When there is no documentation, the law favors properly filed new claims. How convenient. No further questions. The afternoon wore on. Blackwell called his second witness, another land office employee who testified about boundary discrepancies and surveying errors. Harrigan dismantled him too, showing that the alleged errors were based on surveys conducted after Bridger's claim, not during. Then it was Harrigan's turn to present. He started with Pete McAllister. The old surveyor walked to the stand with surprising dignity, his back straight despite his years, his good eye clear and focused. When asked to state his profession, his voice was strong. I was a territorial surveyor for 35 years. Retired now, but I did most of the survey work in this district in the 1870s. Harrigan held up the leather portfolio of maps and notes. Mr. McAllister, do you recognize these documents? I do. Those are my original survey records for the Bridger property conducted in August of 1878. And what do these records show? Pete went through the technical details. Boundaries clearly marked, corners properly established, everything done according to territorial surveying standards. His testimony was precise, professional, unshakable. When Blackwell rose for cross-examination, his tone was dismissive. Mr. McAllister, is it true that you currently reside in Mr. Bridger's barn? Pete hesitated for just a moment. It is. Is it also true that you accepted $50 from my client 3 days ago to provide contrary testimony? A murmur ran through the courtroom. Pete's face went pale, then red. I took the money, yes, but I gave it back, yesterday, because I realized that some things are worth more than $50. His voice gained strength. I realized that a man's honor matters, that the truth matters, that I would rather die poor and honest than live rich and ashamed. The murmur grew louder. Barnes rapped his gavel once for quiet. Did you give the money back before or after Mr. Bridger approached you? Blackwell pressed. After. He reminded me who I used to be, before whiskey and age made me forget. So you changed your testimony in exchange for shelter. How is that different from changing it for money? Because money is about what you have. Shelter is about who you are. Pete looked directly at Blackwell. And I am not the man you paid me to be. Blackwell tried several more angles, but Pete held firm. Finally, the lawyer gave up, waving his hand dismissively. No further questions for this witness. Harrigan called witness after witness, ranchers who testified to Samuel's continuous occupation of the land, merchants who produced receipts for lumber and supplies purchased for building, the blacksmith who had shoed Samuel's horses for 7 years, each person adding another stone to the foundation of truth. Then came Ayana. She walked to the stand with her head high, moving carefully on her healing ankle. When she raised her right hand to be sworn in, Samuel saw several people in the courtroom exchange glances. An Apache woman testifying in a white man's court was unusual enough to draw attention. Harrigan led her through her testimony gently. She explained about her husband Robert working for Pete McAllister in 1878, described helping with the Bridger survey, carrying water to the crew, watching the boundary markers being set. "And you remember this specifically because," Harrigan asked, "because my husband spoke of it often. He said it was the cleanest survey he ever helped with. Said Pete McAllister was the most honest surveyor in the territory." She paused. "My husband was killed 4 years ago by men trying to steal land. He died defending a neighbor's water rights. He taught me that standing up for what is right matters more than standing aside to be safe." Blackwell's cross-examination was aggressive, bordering on hostile. "Mrs. Hayes, you are Apache, are you not?" "I am." "And your testimony today is in support of a white man against a white-owned company. Do you not find that unusual?" Ayana's eyes flashed, but her voice remained steady. "I find it unusual that you think race matters more than truth. I am testifying to what I saw, what I remember. The color of Mr. Bridger's skin has nothing to do with whether his claim is valid. You were on his property 2 days ago, were you not, staying in his home?" "I was." "Does that not suggest a relationship that might compromise your objectivity?" "It suggests that I know the character of the man I am defending, that I have seen him stop to help a stranger, that I have seen him protect his family, that I have seen him choose right over easy." She leaned forward slightly. "Can you say the same about your clients?" Objection. Blackwell's face had gone red. "The witness is being argumentative." "Sustained," Barnes said, but there was a glint in his eye that suggested he appreciated Ayana's spirit. "Mrs. Hayes, please confine yourself to answering the questions asked." Blackwell tried to rattle her further, but Ayana held firm. Finally, he dismissed her with a wave of contempt. As she left the stand, passing Samuel's table, their eyes met. She nodded once. Samuel nodded back. A conversation without words. The afternoon stretched toward evening. More witnesses, more documents. The pile of evidence growing higher, the case solidifying around the simple truth that Samuel Bridger had lived on and improved his land continuously for 7 years, had paid taxes, had built a life. Finally, at 6 o'clock, both sides rested. Judge Barnes sat back in his chair, surveying the courtroom. "I will take this matter under advisement," he said. "Given the seriousness of the issues and the volume of testimony, I will not rush to judgment. I will review all evidence and render a decision tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. He paused, his gaze moving from Samuel to the Prescott land and cattle representatives. "I will say this, however. I am troubled by certain patterns that have emerged in testimony today. The Territorial Land Office will be subject to audit, and anyone found to have participated in fraudulent claims will face criminal charges. Court is adjourned." The gavel fell. Samuel sat frozen for a moment, the words sinking in. Not a victory yet, not a loss either. Uncertainty for another night. People began filing out. Several stopped to shake Samuel's hand to offer encouragement. Pete McAllister gripped his shoulder. "You did good today, son. Real good." Harrigan gathered his papers efficiently. "We have a strong case, very strong. But Barnes is a careful man. He will not rule hastily." He looked at Samuel. "Go home. Rest. Try not to worry." Try not to worry. As if that were possible. Samuel, Ayana, and Thomas left the courthouse together. The sun was setting, painting Prescott in shades of orange and purple. The town was quieter now, winding down from the day's heat and activity. They were crossing the plaza when Samuel noticed the 3 men from Prescott Land and Cattle standing near a freight wagon. The leader saw them, said something to his companions. They began moving not directly toward Samuel's group, but on an intercept course, casual but deliberate. "Keep walking," Samuel said quietly to Ayana. "Get Thomas to the wagon." But before they could reach it, the 3 men were there, blocking their path. "Nice performance today, Bridger," the leader said. His smile was ugly. "Very touching. The loyal neighbors, the noble surveyor, the savage squaw speaking up for the white man, almost made me weep." Samuel felt rage building but forced himself to stay still. Ayana's presence beside him, calm and steady, helped him hold his ground without reacting. Harrigan's words echoed in his mind. "Stay calm. Do not let them provoke you." "We are leaving now," Samuel said evenly. "Step aside." "Oh, we will. But first a friendly warning. See, whatever the judge decides tomorrow does not really matter. Even if by some miracle he rules in your favor, you still have to live on that land. Still have to sleep at night. Still have to worry about that boy of yours." Samuel's jaw tightened, but he kept his hands at his sides. No reaching for weapons, no physical contact. The leader noticed his restraint, smirked. "Learning to behave yourself, I see." He leaned closer. "Here is the truth, Bridger. We own this territory. We own the land office. We own the sheriff. Hell, we probably own half the witnesses who testified for you today. So you can have your little court victory. You can frame the judge's ruling and hang it on your wall. But that land will be ours eventually, one way or another." "Are you threatening me?" Samuel's voice was low, dangerous. "I am educating you about how the world really works." The leader stepped back, spread his hands in mock innocence. "But do not take my word for it. Ask your Apache friend here. Ask her about what happens to people who stand in the way of progress. Ask her about reservations and relocations and all the promises that got broken." Ayana spoke, then her voice cold as winter stone. "You are right about one thing. I have seen what happens when powerful men decide they want what belongs to others. I have seen my people forced from their land, their promises broken, their dignity stolen." She paused, her dark eyes boring into the leader's face. "But I have also seen that power built on cruelty always falls. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but eventually. And when it falls hard." The leader's smile faded. For just a moment something like uncertainty flickered in his eyes. Then it was gone, replaced by cold calculation. "Tomorrow at 9, he said. "We will be there. And Bridger." He waited until Samuel met his gaze. "Win or lose, you should start packing." They walked away, boots echoing on wooden sidewalks, disappearing into the gathering darkness. Samuel stood motionless, fury and fear warring inside him. "Come," Ayana said, gently tugging his arm. "They want you to react, want you to give them a reason to hurt you before the judge rules. Do not give them that satisfaction." Samuel let himself be led to the wagon. Thomas climbed in back, silent and pale. Samuel took the reins and they rode out of Prescott as night claimed the desert, three people bound together by circumstance and choice, heading toward a home that might not be theirs tomorrow. The ranch was dark when they arrived. Samuel lit lamps, checked doors and windows, made sure the Winchester was loaded and within reach. Pete emerged from the barn loft, moving carefully in the darkness. "How did it go?" the old man asked. "We wait until morning." Samuel's voice was flat with exhaustion. "The judge will rule at 9. They ate a cold supper of bread and cheese, no one speaking much. Thomas went to bed early, worn out by the day's tension. Ayana helped Samuel change the binding on his ribs, her hands gentle but efficient. "You should rest," she said when she finished. "Tomorrow will be difficult, regardless of the outcome. I am not sure I can sleep." "Then just lie down. Close your eyes. Let your body rest, even if your mind cannot." Samuel did as she suggested, stretching out on his bed fully clothed, staring at the ceiling. He heard Ayana moving in the other room, heard Pete settling into the barn loft, heard the desert wind that never stopped. And somewhere in the darkness, despite everything, sleep found him. He dreamed of circles, of stones placed one by one, of his father's face, young and frightened and saved by an Apache woman he would never see again, of Thomas growing into a man learning that standing up mattered more than standing aside, of Ayana, her hand in his, building something that had no name yet but felt like the beginning of everything that mattered. When he woke, dawn, light was streaming through the window. His body ached. His ribs throbbed. But his mind was clear. Today the judge would rule. Today they would learn if trust built stone by stone was strong enough to stand against power built on lies. Today would decide everything. Samuel rose dressed carefully and walked to the kitchen where Ayana was already making coffee. She looked at him, and he saw his own determination reflected in her eyes. "Ready?" she asked. "Ready," he said, and together they prepared to face whatever judgment was coming. The courtroom was packed by 8:30. Samuel arrived early with Ayana, Thomas, and Pete taking their seats in the front row. The benches behind them filled quickly with familiar faces. His witnesses from yesterday, neighbors who had traveled to town to hear the verdict, strangers drawn by gossip about the Apache woman who had testified so powerfully. The Prescott land and cattle representatives sat across the aisle in their expensive suits radiating confidence. The leader caught Samuel's eye and smiled, that cold smile touching his bruised neck as if to remind Samuel of what was coming regardless of the judge's decision. At precisely 9 o'clock, Judge Barnes entered. Everyone rose, the scrape of boots on wooden floor like a collective held breath being released. Barnes settled into his chair, adjusted his spectacles, and surveyed the crowded room with those sharp eyes that missed nothing. "Before I render my decision," Barnes began, his voice carrying clearly through the silent courtroom, "I want to address something that became apparent during yesterday's proceedings. This case is not simply about one parcel of land. It is about the integrity of our territorial land system. It is about whether property rights mean anything or whether they can be erased through bureaucratic manipulation and convenient document loss." He paused, letting the words settle like dust. "I have served as a territorial judge for 16 years. In that time I have seen this country transform from wilderness into civilization. I have watched honest people build homes and ranches and farms on land that once knew only sage and cactus. And I have watched with growing concern as certain interests have used legal mechanisms to steal what others built." The Prescott land and cattle lawyer Blackwell shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. The evidence presented yesterday was overwhelming. 14 witnesses testified to Samuel Bridger's continuous occupation and improvement of the disputed property. Tax records spanning 7 years were entered into evidence. Survey maps and notes from the original 1878 claim were precise and professional. Against this, the opposition offered only the absence of one document and the testimony of 2 land office clerks whose credibility is, to put it charitably, questionable. Samuel's heart began to pound. He felt Ayana's hand find his under the edge of the table, squeeze once hard. "Therefore I rule in favor of the claimant, Samuel Bridger. His homestead claim is valid and will be recognized by this court. Prescott Land and Cattle Company's competing claim is denied." Barnes paused, his gaze moving to the opposition table. "Furthermore, I am referring this matter to the Territorial Attorney General for investigation. There is sufficient evidence to suggest criminal fraud in the land office, and those responsible will be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law." The gavel fell. For a moment the courtroom was absolutely silent. Then it erupted. Cheers from Samuel's side, angry muttering from the other. People standing talking, the noise building like a wave. Samuel sat frozen, the reality of it washing over him slowly. He had won. The land was his. Thomas would have a home. 7 years of work, of building, of surviving had not been for nothing. Beside him, Ayana was crying silently, her shoulders shaking. Pete McAllister wiped his eyes with a weathered hand. Thomas looked up at Samuel with something like awe, as if seeing his guardian in a new light. Harrigan reached across the table, gripped Samuel's shoulder. "Congratulations. Justice actually prevailed today." But Samuel's attention had moved to the opposition table where the 3 men from Prescott Land and Cattle stood. The leader's face was dark with rage. He said something to Blackwell, something sharp and quiet, then turned and walked from the courtroom. His 2 companions followed their boots, loud in the gradually quieting space. "Samuel," Ayana's voice pulled him back. "We should leave. Now. Before they have time to—" She did not finish the sentence. She did not need to. Samuel understood. A court ruling was just paper. What mattered was what happened next in the hours and days when rage had time to ferment into action. They left quickly, avoiding the congratulations, the handshakes, the well-wishers who wanted to celebrate. Outside, the morning sun was already hot, promising a scorching day. Samuel helped Ayana into the wagon, lifted Thomas up beside her, gestured for Pete to join them. "Where are we going?" Thomas asked. "Home," Samuel said. "To our home." The ride south seemed longer than usual, every minute stretched by anticipation and residual fear. Samuel kept checking behind them, watching for riders, for dust clouds, for any sign of pursuit. But the road remained empty, the desert quiet except for the creak of wagon wheels and the steady clip of horse hooves. When they finally reached the ranch, Samuel felt something in his chest loosen. The white house with its split-rail fence, the barn where Pete now lived, the fields where wheat would grow come spring, all of it his, legally, officially, undeniably his. They climbed down from the wagon. Thomas ran ahead to check on the chickens. Pete headed to the barn, moving slowly, looking older and more tired than Samuel had ever seen him. Ayana stood beside the wagon, shading her eyes, looking at the house as if seeing it for the first time. "What are you thinking?" Samuel asked. "I am thinking about circles," she said. "About how my grandmother saved your father and you saved me, and together we saved this place." She turned to him, and in the morning light her face was beautiful in a way that made Samuel's breath catch. "I am thinking about trust. About how it builds stone by stone until it becomes something strong enough to stand on." Samuel wanted to say something profound, something equal to the moment, but the words would not come. So instead he did what felt most natural. He reached out and took her hand, held it openly in the sunlight where anyone could see. She did not pull away. They stood like that for a long moment, two people who had been strangers a week ago, now connected by something neither could fully name, but both understood completely. Then Thomas's voice broke the spell. "Uncle Samuel, someone is coming." Samuel's hand dropped to his belt where his knife waited. He moved to the front of the wagon, looking north toward the road. A single rider approached, moving at an easy pace. As the figure drew closer, Samuel recognized the silver hair, the broad shoulders. Sheriff Morrison. The lawman reined in at the gate, dismounted slowly, his movements deliberate and careful. He nodded to Samuel, touched his hat brim to Ayana. "Bridger, Mrs. Hayes, congratulations on your victory." "Thank you, Sheriff." Samuel's voice was cautious. "What brings you out here?" Morrison tied his horse to the fence rail, walked forward until he stood face to face with Samuel. His expression was serious but not hostile. "I came to apologize, and to explain." He glanced at Ayana. "Mind if we sit? This might take a while." They gathered on the porch, Morrison and Samuel on the steps, Ayana in the rocking chair, Thomas and Pete standing nearby. The sheriff pulled out a pipe, packed it with tobacco, took his time lighting it. Finally he spoke. "I told you yesterday I was building a case, that I could not testify because it would jeopardize my investigation. That was true as far as it went." He puffed on the pipe smoke, rising in lazy spirals. "But it was also cowardice. I was afraid to stand against Prescott Land and Cattle because they have connections, money, power. I told myself I was being strategic when really I was being afraid." Samuel said nothing, just waited. Judge Barnes ruling the way he did changed things. He gave me cover, made it possible to move without looking like I was acting alone. Morrison reached into his coat, pulled out a folded document. "This morning I arrested 3 men. Clayton Voss, the leader of the group that threatened you, and 2 clerks from the Territorial Land Office, the ones who testified yesterday." He handed the document to Samuel. It was a warrant signed by Judge Barnes charging all 3 men with conspiracy to defraud, extortion, and theft of public documents. "Voss talked within 2 hours," Morrison continued. "Gave up everything, names, dates, money amounts. Turns out Prescott Land and Cattle has been running this scheme for 8 months. 23 families have lost their land. The company would identify properties they wanted, Have someone steal the original claim certificates, file new claims, then force the original owners out. He paused. Your case broke it open. The pattern was too obvious. The judge's ruling made it impossible for them to continue. Samuel looked at the warrant, at the names written in official ink, at the charges that would destroy the men who had threatened his family. He should have felt satisfaction, victory, but mostly he just felt tired. What happens now? He asked. Criminal trials, probably in the territorial capital given the scope of it. The company itself will likely survive, but everyone involved in the fraud will face prison time. Morrison stood, knocked ash from his pipe. And the other families who lost their land will have their claims reviewed, restored where possible. Because of yesterday's ruling. Because you stood up. Because you fought when it would have been easier to walk away. Morrison extended his hand. I should have stood with you sooner. I am sorry I did not. Samuel shook the offered hand. You are standing now. That is what matters. After Morrison left, Samuel sat on the porch for a long time, watching the afternoon shadows lengthen across his land. His land. The thought still felt strange, new, like a shirt not yet broken in. Ayana came out eventually, 2 cups of coffee in her hands. She gave him one, sat in the rocking chair, and for a while they just rocked and drank and watched the desert light change from white to gold to amber. What will you do now? Samuel asked finally. I have been thinking about that. Ayana stared into her coffee cup, as if reading the future in the dark liquid. I have been living in town, teaching at the reservation school, keeping my distance from both worlds, white and Apache, not quite belonging to either. She looked up at him. But maybe that is the wrong approach. Maybe belonging is not about choosing one world or the other. Maybe it is about building something new, something that honors both. What are you saying? I am saying that Sarah needs a real home, a place to grow up where she can learn both her father's world and her mother's, a place with land and animals and hard work. She paused, meeting his eyes directly. I am saying that you and Thomas need more than just survival. You need family, community, connection. Samuel's heart was pounding now, understanding where she was leading but not daring to assume. I am saying, Ayana continued, her voice steady despite the weight of the words, that my grandmother was right. The one who saved me needed to be saved himself. And maybe the way we save each other is by building something together, stone by stone, like she taught us. Ayana. Samuel set down his coffee cup, turned to face her fully. Are you asking what I think you are asking? I am asking if you would consider letting Sarah and me stay, not as guests, not temporarily, but as family. She smiled, and it was tender and nervous and hopeful all at once. I am asking if you believe in second chances, in new beginnings, in trust that has been tested and found worthy. Samuel thought about his wife dead 3 years, thought about the son he had lost buried under tons of rock and earth, thought about the years of grief and guilt and slow suffocation under the weight of failure. Then he thought about the woman on the mountain clinging to stone, giving up hope until a stranger stopped. Thought about a hummingbird carved by old hands carrying prayers forward through time. Thought about his father saved by an Apache medicine woman who became the grandmother of the woman sitting before him now. Circles completing themselves, debts paid forward instead of back, trust like water finding its vessels. Yes, Samuel said. His voice was rough with emotion. Yes to all of it, to family, to new beginnings, to building something that honors what was and what could be. He reached out, took her hand again. Yes, Ayana, stay. Make this your home. Make us your family. To whom she was crying again, but smiling through the tears. It will not be easy. People will talk. They will judge. An Apache woman and a white man, a mixed child and an orphaned boy building a family together. Let them talk. Samuel squeezed her hand. Let them judge. We know the truth. We know what matters. Thomas came out, then looked at them, holding hands. At the tears on Ayana's face, at Samuel's smile. The boy's eyes went wide with understanding. "Is Miss Ayana staying?" he asked cautiously, as if afraid the answer might shatter if spoken too loud. "She is," Samuel confirmed. "She and Sarah, if that is all right with you." Thomas thought about it for exactly 3 seconds. Then he grinned, a real genuine grin that Samuel had not seen in 2 years. "Can I teach Sarah to ride a horse?" the boy asked. Ayana laughed through her tears. "If her mother allows it, yes." "Then I think it is a great idea," Thomas said solemnly. Then he ran off, whooping with joy, releasing energy that had been bottled up for too long. That evening they celebrated with a simple meal. Samuel had killed a chicken that morning, and Ayana roasted it with wild onions and potatoes from the root cellar. Pete joined them, bringing a bottle of whiskey he had been saving, pouring small amounts for everyone except Thomas, who got cider instead. They toasted to victory, to justice, to new beginnings, to family however it was formed, whatever shape it took. As darkness fell and the desert cooled, Samuel and Ayana walked out to look at the land. The stars were emerging brilliant and countless, turning the sky into a river of light. "I want to return to the sacred circle," Ayana said, "to tell my grandmother what happened, to show her that her prayers were answered." "When?" "Tomorrow, if your ribs can handle the climb." "My ribs will manage." Samuel looked at her profile in the starlight, at the strength in her face, the peace. "Will you take Sarah?" "Yes. She should see the place, should understand where she comes from, should know about the hummingbird and the trust it represents." They stood in comfortable silence, listening to coyotes sing their evening chorus, listening to the wind that never stopped listening to the sounds of home. 6 months passed. The seasons turned as seasons do, indifferent to human drama, caring only for the eternal cycle of heat and cold, wet and dry growth and dormancy. Winter came to the Arizona territory, bringing cool nights and occasional rain that turned the desert briefly green. Sarah arrived in November, a shy 8-year-old with her mother's dark eyes and her father's freckles. Thomas took to her immediately, appointed himself her protector and teacher, showing her how to gather eggs, how to pump water, how to read the signs that meant a storm was coming. Pete McAllister stopped drinking. He worked on the ranch now, earning his keep through carpentry and fence repair. His hands remembering skills they had forgotten, his dignity slowly returning. He was building a workshop in the barn, a place where he could return to surveying when the Territorial Land Office was finally cleaned up and reorganized. The criminal trials happened in January, swift and decisive. Clayton Voss received 10 years in territorial prison. The 2 land office clerks received 7 years each. The Prescott Land and Cattle Company was dissolved, its assets seized, to provide restitution to the families it had defrauded. 23 families had their land restored. 23 homes were saved because Samuel Bridger had chosen to fight instead of flee. Sheriff Morrison stopped by regularly, bringing news, bringing friendship, bringing his own quiet apology in the form of attention and respect. He told Samuel that the territorial governor had taken notice that reforms were being implemented, that what happened in that courtroom had rippled outward in ways no one could have predicted. And slowly, carefully, Samuel and Ayana built something new. They were not married yet, both wanting to take time to be certain to honor what they had lost while making space for what they were becoming. But they were family in all the ways that mattered. Shared meals, shared work, shared laughter and occasional tears. 2 damaged people teaching each other how to trust again, how to hope again, how to believe that endings could become beginnings if you were brave enough to let them. In March, when the weather turned warm and the desert bloomed with unexpected wildflowers, they made the climb back to the sacred circle, all of them together. Samuel and Ayana Thomas and Sarah Pete bringing up the rear, moving slower but steady. The circle of white stones was exactly as Samuel remembered. 12 stones forming a perfect ring, the ashes of old fires at the center. But there was something new. The wooden hummingbird was still there, undisturbed by weather or time or animals, and beside it someone had placed wildflowers, fresh ones, placed recently, Ayana knelt at the edge of the circle, tears on her cheeks. "The Apache women come here still," she whispered, "to pray, to remember, to honor her." Samuel knelt beside her, pulled the silver pendant from beneath his shirt. He had not taken it off since that day on the mountain when everything changed. He held it in his palm, the turquoise eyes catching sunlight, the wings spread wide in eternal flight. "What should we do?" he asked quietly. Ayana thought for a moment. Then she reached into the bag she carried, pulled out 3 small wooden carvings. Hummingbirds, each one about 2 inches tall, each one carved with love and care during the long winter evenings. "I made these," she said. "One for each child. One for Pete, so they understand, so they remember, so they carry the lesson forward." She placed them in a row beside the original carving, beside the wildflowers. Trust is not something you possess. It is something you build, something you give, something you pass along. Thomas and Sarah knelt beside them, looking at the carvings with solemn understanding. Pete stood behind his weathered face, wet with tears he no longer tried to hide. "What do we do now?" Thomas asked. The question was simple but profound, carrying weight beyond its words. Samuel looked at the circle of stones, at the carvings and flowers, at the people surrounding him who had become more than companions, more than allies, more than friends, who had become the thing he thought he had lost forever when his son died and his wife followed. Family. "Now," Samuel said, "we go home. We do our work. We raise these children. We help our neighbors. We build something that lasts." He paused, choosing words carefully. "And when the time comes, when Thomas and Sarah are grown and building their own lives, we teach them to do the same, to stop for strangers, to stand up when others walk away, to build trust stone by stone, knowing it will matter to people they will never meet in ways they cannot predict." "Like Grandmother Dakota did," Sarah said softly. It was one of the first times she had spoken directly to Samuel, and her voice was sweet and clear. "Exactly like Grandmother Dakota did," Ayana confirmed. She reached out, took Samuel's hand in one of hers, Sarah's in the other. Thomas took Samuel's free hand. Pete placed his weathered palms on the shoulders of both children. They formed their own circle, then standing around the stone circle, 5 people connected by choice and circumstance, by trust, earned and freely given. And in that moment Samuel felt it, the presence he had felt 6 months ago. Not quite a ghost, not quite a spirit, but something, a grandmother's knowing. The wisdom of old hands that had carved prayers into wood, that had saved a soldier's life, that had set in motion a chain of events that would take 20 years to complete. She was there, approving, satisfied, at peace. Then she was gone, and they were alone on the mountain. 5 people and 3 carved hummingbirds and the eternal Arizona sky. They descended together as the sun climbed toward noon, moving slowly, helping each other over rough patches, talking quietly about plans for spring planting, about the foal that would be born in May, about the reading lessons Sarah was teaching Thomas, about the simple, ordinary things that made up a life. At the base of the mountain, they paused to rest. Samuel looked back up at the trail, at the sacred circle hidden somewhere in the heights, at the place where endings had become beginnings. "Do you ever regret it?" Ayana asked quietly. "Stopping that day, saving me everything that came after." Samuel thought about the question seriously, giving it the weight it deserved. Thought about the fear, the fights, the pain. Thought about nearly losing Thomas, nearly losing everything. Then he thought about this moment. Standing in the spring sunshine with people who trusted him, who he trusted in return. With children laughing. With a future that looked nothing like the past, but felt right in ways he could not articulate. "Not for 1 second," he said. Ayana smiled that smile that still made his breath catch. "Good. Because I am not done building yet. Not nearly done." "Building what?" "Everything. Home, family, trust. A life that honors where I came from while creating something new." She gestured toward the ranch in the distance. "Stone by stone, Samuel Bridger. That is how circles get completed." "Stone by stone," he agreed, and together with their children and their friend with their past and their future, walking beside them, they headed home. Epilogue. 20 years later, in the spring of 1906, Thomas Bridger stood in the same courtroom where his uncle had fought for their land. He was 33 now, broad-shouldered and sun-weathered, wearing the badge of Prescott County Sheriff with pride. Beside him sat his wife Rachel and their son, 6 years old, named James Samuel Bridger, after both his great-grandfather and the man who had raised his father. The boy held something in his small hands, a silver pendant on a leather cord, a hummingbird with turquoise eyes. "Tell me again," the child said, his voice carrying the impatience of 6-year-olds everywhere. "Tell me about the hummingbird." Thomas smiled, reached out to touch the pendant gently. "Your grandfather Samuel wore this every day. His father wore it before him, given by an Apache medicine woman who saved his life. And when grandfather Samuel died, he gave it to me. And now I am giving it to you." "But why a hummingbird?" "Because hummingbirds never give up. They fight the wind. They fly impossible distances. They are small but mighty, and they teach us that sometimes the smallest acts of courage create the biggest changes." The boy considered this solemnly. "Like stopping to help someone." "Exactly like that." "I would stop," the child declared. "If I saw someone who needed help, I would stop." Thomas felt his throat tighten with emotion. He thought about his uncle, dead 5 years now, buried beside Ayana, who had followed him within a year. He thought about Sarah now, a teacher at the territorial school, using her mixed heritage to bridge 2 worlds. He thought about old Pete McAllister, who had lived to 95, who had spent his last years training young surveyors to be honest, to be thorough, to understand that their work mattered. He thought about circles completing themselves, about trust passed forward through generations, about lessons learned on mountainsides and in courtrooms and around dinner tables where families were built stone by stone. "I know you would," Thomas said to his son. He lifted the pendant's cord, placed it around the small neck. "This is yours now. Wear it. Remember what it means. And when you are grown, when you have children of your own, pass it along. Tell them the story. Make sure they understand." "Understand what?" Thomas looked at his son, at those innocent eyes that had not yet learned how cruel the world could be, how indifferent, how willing to walk past suffering without stopping. "That we save each other," Thomas said. "That trust is built stone by stone. That every choice to help instead of hurt, to stop instead of walk away, matters more than we can ever know. That the person you save might save someone else, and that person might save another, and the circle goes on, rippling forward through time." The boy touched the pendant, feeling its weight. "Like throwing a stone in water." "Yes, exactly like that." Outside the courthouse, spring sunshine painted Prescott in shades of gold. The town had grown transformed from rough frontier settlement into something approaching civilization. But the mountains remained unchanged, eternal, holding their secrets and their sacred spaces, waiting for the next person who would need to learn what Samuel Bridger had learned on a September morning in 1885. That some debts are meant to be paid forward. That trust once given echoes through generations. That circles patiently built eventually complete themselves. Thomas took his son's hand, and together they walked out into the bright Arizona day, carrying forward a legacy of hummingbirds and hope of stopping when others walked away, of building something that would outlast them all. Stone by stone, trust by trust, one choice at a time.